Good morning. I'm not used to talking with a microphone. I prefer to pace and yell. So if the volume is too loud or too soft or I'm spitting in it, let me know. This is the story of my failed attempt to be an O'Reilly author. See how it goes. It starts a few days after the last but one international LISP conference when Dan Weinreb was Dan here. Did he here? Oh, he didn't make it. Okay. Dan sent this email around to everyone who had attended. Was I interested? Was I? Oh yes, I dropped what I was doing, and I had till the end of the month to spend it or lose it. But I just dropped income for a couple of days, and I wrote to the editor and said, "Look, the O'Reilly website says you don't want to write about LISP. You don't want to hear about LISP. So what's going on here? What's his dismal sales? I hear that Pete Siebel's book is doing very well. He sold 8,000 or 10,000 copies. And the problem is that as far as publishers are concerned, if you don't sell 20 or 30,000, you haven't really broken even. And that's really quite a hill to climb for us listeners. You put Java on the front cover, you can do it. But we had something of a mountain to climb. But nevertheless, he said, I've had a couple of proposals, submit yours, and we'll see how it goes, and I'll put it to the various committees and see what happens. So, oops, you have to write a proposal. That's the first thing. What was I going to write about? Where was I going to find my muse? Well, here he is. Gerald Sussman at the LISP conference. This photo that Pete Gabriel took that week. Richard Gabriel took that week. Sussman gave a 5-minute lightning talk on the subject of why MIT no longer uses a LISP variant scheme for its Introduction to Programming course. And the answer goes like this. Back in the day, in the mid-1980s, when the world was a bit narrower, it was valid to teach your undergraduates quite narrow programming problems like Towers of Hanoi. And something like scheme and small pieces were ideal ways to approach this problem. These days, the sort of real problem that you get is a badly behaved robot arm, half of whose manual is full of bugs and the other half is missing altogether. And it just happened that, and Sussman was instrumental in pushing this change, and it just happened that the badly programmed robot arm they obtained was written in Python, and they followed that. But all this got me to thinking about libraries and common Lisp libraries and why you always have such difficulty finding and getting your hands on the libraries you want. And this is what inspired my choice of topic. And hence the title of the book, Lisp Outside the Box. The box is what you get when you open the hyperspec. It's a large language. It has lots of what other languages have called libraries built into it. You can process the strings without going anywhere else. But you can't reach out further than the clock and the file system. You want to talk to anything else, you are stuffed. So my plan was to show people that this wasn't actually the end of the line. There's been a lot of work in the last few decades. Lisp has been around for long enough. And obviously Lisp is used for countless real applications. And it's not as hard as you might think. It's certainly not impossible. So, I was going to write a book about Lisp and its libraries. And my message was you can do more or less what you want. I wasn't going to try and say, here's how to do everything, because there was far too much of it. Even in the Lisp world, there are thousands of libraries around. I wasn't going to attempt to rework either Paul or Pete's books for two reasons. One, they're good enough. They're great as 101s. Everyone thought Paul's book was brilliant until Siebel's came along, which is also brilliant. The other thing is they share the same defect that Lisp has, Common Lisp has, which is they don't look outside the box. They don't go any further. A couple of other things. I was determined at the time not to make this a research project. I thought, well, I know about enough libraries, I can just do this. That failed. And the other problem I was aware of was that moving targets and variable quality. I'll come back to that a bit later. A controversial decision I made at the beginning was a balance between the commercial and the free. I feel this is very important because both camps are represented here and across the board. So to take the approach of we're going to take SBCR or Allegro and we're going to run with that and what that gives you would just have been wholly inappropriate. this gave me problems with my editor, who said at the beginning, 11 common lisps? How the hell am I supposed to choose? This is chapter 1, I don't even know what it does yet. But, you know, that's life. And similarly, between the commercial libraries and the free ones. And I'll come back to this again later. I would still like, 2 years after I finished attempting to write this book, to come up with a single major example you can run through the whole book. Couldn't come up with something that just covered all the ground. So you could servers, clients, and small stuff, big stuff. I was going to have to introduce Common Lisp because some of my readers, including my editor, didn't know anything about it. I put my finger in the air and decided about a third of the book would do this, and the rest would be libraries. So here are the first 2 sections of this 6-section book. 7 sections, and here I am introducing Common Lisp, the first few chapters. Standard tools, 4th one down, this is the listener, the debugger, the inspector, the editor, and some notions of integration between them. So although we're on the fringes of Common Lisp, because Common Lisp doesn't say how the inspector or the debugger work, you've got to come across these early. Preliminaries was choosing Common Lisp, how to start it, how to stop it, how to write to all the vendors and file. I didn't have all the list, I never got to see Cyan, and also how to get out to the debugger the first time you hit too many right parentheses or something. An interesting experiment, which I never got to conduct, was postponing all talk about lists and conses until right before the chapter on macros. It would have been an interesting experiment. Never got to conduct it. If somebody else is ever writing an introduction to Lisp, let me know how it went. So I started writing in the middle of the book on the grounds that the needs of the later chapters would dictate the subset of Common Lisp that went into the earlier ones. This drove my editor wild because he didn't understand any of this stuff, and we just had to deal with that. So I started with chapter 3, and the idea was each chapter would look a little bit further out from the one before. So chapter 3 was a Lisp chosen sort of at random, and the libraries that accompanied it. And then we moved on. Chapter 4, okay, I picked a library, but it was then how do you get your hands on this library? How do you find this library? How do you get your hands on it? And at this point, you need Slime and ASDF in order to be able to do anything at all. And so on, we look further out and further out as the sections progress. I randomly semi-randomly chose Allegro and Windows for section 3, Clojure and FreeBSD for section 4, and so on and so forth. Covered all my bases. I got as far as writing the first chapter in section 5, Serving HTTP, and I think this is actually my best chapter, so it's a good one to go out on. And if anyone's ever going to read just one of my chapters, I would make it that one. It's how to build a working web server with about 200 lines of code on top of a mod list. And I've used this myself a couple of times since then. The chapter in front of me, Creating Code. So chart.ravenbook.com, which I talked about at the Hamburg meeting in March, April this year, was built on that. So I was quite happy with it. And I never got as far as this end of the book, but this is how it would have finished. So, you want to write a book, you've actually got to sit down and write it every day. Telling yourself, well, I'm going to earn money this week, doesn't move the book forwards. You've got to sit down and write it. If they want it in DocBook, ignore that. Write it in text, in Emacs, make it quick, get the words out, and do the RSI thrash to convert it into DocBook, which is hideous, but if you're writing for a while, you're going to have to live with it. Do that at the end of each chapter. My estimates for how long it will take, and these are way off. So 500 hours, and I've written maybe a third of the book, first draft. And each chapter grew in the telling, and some of them really could have been whole books. So you could write a book on threading in Lisp, or web servers in Lisp, dead easy, you know. So the first thing that happened, a few editorial clashes and crunches, my original plan for the book was something like 6 or 7 chapters, 50-page chapters. And then I could wallow around, I could talk about image processing, libraries, and ASDF, and Slime, interleave them and to work my way through, so we actually do a real exercise in one go. But the editors said, look, people don't have the attention span. 10 or 15 pages per chapter, maximum. And this is actually quite a hard constraint to be rated against. Another real annoyance was a 75 character per line limit on code sense. This didn't fill the whole page horizontally, but it's what they insisted on. It meant that a lot of horizontal space was lost and the vertical space was consumed, and I'm working on this page limit. So, and I won't even talk about .book. We'll skip it. Anyway, I got the first few chapters bashed off, and they said, well, we'll send you a check. So I tried to explain the difference between a check and a check, because one sort I can cash and the other I can't. And they sent me one, so I got it. There it is. I had to actually send it back to them before they sent me an electronic one. It looks dead nice. I've got a copy of it. So, you can't please anybody some of the time. I really liked my chapter on memory management, and other people hated it. I had introduced threads as part of Allegro Common Lisp, so I used the Allegro threads interface to do this with, and I got, well, to the extent that I got deluged with anything. I got bombarded with why I didn't use Bordeaux. Well, tough. And I learnt afterwards that you shouldn't rely on Reddit for public else. Okay. On the O'Reilly website, it says, and this is by the illustrator of these gorgeous animals, I ask the authors to supply me with a description of the topic of the book. What I'm looking for is adjectives. It's very arty. That will give me an idea of the real personality of the topic. Authors are free to make suggestions about animals, but I prefer to deal with adjectives. Well, I was still waiting for this phone call. We were on holiday in Somerset when this PDF turned up. So much for the adjectives. They said we need a tagline, and this is the best I came up with. Here are some other possibilities. Mercifully, I don't have to complete that one now. If I hadn't done it, then they would have come up with something terrible. So that's one of the things you learn about working with a large organisation. They're not whatever they are. Anyway, they print stuff on books. Anyway, I had got about a third of the way through this when my state of health, and this is the only reason I stopped writing, forced me to cut back on my paid work and completely abandon the book, and I just stopped overnight. So I'd written 11 chapters out of 31 or 32. Some of them were moderately polished, the ones I'd written earlier. The ones I'd just finished, nobody had seen them yet. So it's really variable. I'm happier with some than others. I really like the SBCL mod list chapter. I quite like the introduction chapter. I like one or two others. Some of them are dry. The chapter on how to use the REPL and write defuncts is just boring. I don't understand why. This chapter on slime reads like a laundry list, but I don't know how to improve. There's a lot of do this, do that, do the other. If you want to do this, I don't know. I do not know how to improve it. It's currently all out on my website under the most restrictive Creative Commons license there is. There's a reason for that, which is that O'Reilly have paid me, as you've seen the evidence, for 4 of these chapters, and they got to call what license is going to be on those. I could put a different license on the others, and if I begged O'Reilly, they might see fit to have a more flexible license on the 4 chapters they paid for. But someone will have to approach me and say, I want to use this material, otherwise I'm not going to bother to write a letter. I blogged as I went, because O'Reilly said this is a good idea, and it worked very well for the Haskell book. So these are my blog topics against which the number of responses, and it's just mildly entertaining that when you push you push material out, which is these 2 and the last one, nobody really cares. But if you want to talk, if you want to talk about something technical, you get lots of replies. That one was really interesting. And there have been some Lisp implementations in which 3 was not equal to 3, but none of them. Okay, there are all sorts of problems with it. Interesting ones. At the time I was writing, I knew symmetric multiprocessing was coming, but there really wasn't enough that I could say about it. So it's got a brief paragraph, and that is wholly inadequate now. And so that chapter would have needed major rewriting. Iteration, the lost chapter. I originally was going to have, in the Allegro section, a chapter on iteration. It's going to talk about iterating through an Allegro cache and advanced loop constructs. And I was going to read Richard Waters' series package and understand it. I've been promising myself that for over 20 years. That was going to finally happen. But the Allegro cache material just expanded and overwhelmed it. So, yeah. And then there were 1 or 2 quirks that were hard to write about in a positive way. I just want to show you one of them. but I don't want to say anything about that. That was just too painful. You just have to skip. And then here is one that I'm going to spend about a quarter of an hour ranting about. There is no single repository for listing Common Lisp libraries. I just can't believe it. I mean, the other thing I couldn't really believe is I got this statement, this is a quote from my book, past my editor without him blinking. And he blinked very hard at a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. He was, call this a modern programming language? Sorry, Mike. But this one he didn't even notice. But it's, well, I mean, okay. So what am I talking about? There's the wiki, the directory, there's Common Lisp projects, all these hundreds of things. I'll go through them in a minute. But just bear these three in mind. What I usually do these days if I'm looking for a library is I hit Google, because it's the quickest way of finding something. So, earlier this year when I was writing this talk, I typed into Google Lisp libraries, and this is what I got. Sorry? Yeah. That's good, but it doesn't actually list them. Well, it does list the libraries in alphabetical order, just their names, not what they do. So if you wanted a library for, I don't know, think of a library. If you want a PDF library, you might, by searching for PDF, find it. Something more obscure. Yeah. Okay, so this is a description of the top 10 hits. Now, I've been to this site 3 or 4 times over the summer, and they vary in order, but actually it's always the same top 10. So, where would you go to get a reference to the clicky, commonlisp.net, and the directory? And the answer is the brief and somewhat out-of-date forum entry. Were we to know that? Well, certainly if you looked at the clicky listing on that Google search page, it wouldn't have told you to go there. Really. I mean, Quick Lisp is a good way to get Lisp libraries, but that's not the question we were asking. So here is his forum page, and you can wander down it, and if you're unlucky, you will hit the link to Mudballs. Do you remember Mudballs? No? It was doing what Quick Lisp claims to do now, and this is where it ended up. So, we need to improve on this. If you've got a pointy-haired boss or an O'Reilly editor stood behind you, this is not the presentation to make. So let's just go through these three contenders. Common Lisp projects. It's great at what it does. It does what it says on the tin. It's a hosting, redirecting site, 400 projects, listed alphabetically. If you don't know what they are, I mean, Claw, Cleric, and Cloud. These are wonderful. They'd be great sidekicks in a Disney movie. I have no idea what they do. I love the names. The Common Lisp directory, 500 or 600 libraries. I had no way of telling what the overlap was between that and the one before. Was I looking at 600? Was I looking at 1,000? I can't tell. There is some breakdown by subject. If you have courage, dear hearts, and click through, you'll get to what we wanted, but you can do a lot of backtracking. And the descriptions are auto-chopped at so many characters, so what you were saying was after the 113th character, nobody's going to see it. The clicky is the best of the lot. Couple of problems with it. My main problem is that it's restricted to free software, and there are a lot of good libraries out there that will therefore never be mentioned. The one that springs to mind is LispWorks Cappy, a windowing development tool cross-platform. It's proprietary, it belongs to a single commercial Lisp. It's not mentioned anywhere. Well, it is mentioned on the clip, so it doesn't get a headline mention. If you were looking for such a beast and you went to the clicky, you wouldn't find it. And I think this is a serious failure. There are some good points in the clicky, in particular the prominent link to Planet Lisp, and its page of 30 or so recommended libraries. And this shows a bit of manual intervention and top-level thinking, which I think is really important on this task. I believe, not passionately enough that I'm going to sort of spend my life on it, but I do actually believe, I've been hassling people like Ernst about this for some years, what we need is one good one. Yeah, we've had this one. Yeah? You've got to have confidence in the results. It's got to be easy. We could do this. So this is my proposal, that we should converge on one repository of Common Lisp library listings. It should have an obvious name, an obvious place to find it, It should be linked to by other implementations and other meta sites, and it should be professional, and it should be the place where people start. So let's just go briefly into detail. Readily located. What I mean by this is that there should be a place where you go and you find all of these wonderful things. There isn't such a thing. After all these years, there is no place where you could go and on one screen get to a list of all the implementations and the download links and the white papers for the pointy-haired boss and the CUDAs and the list groups and the conferences and the ECLMs and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't exist. You sort of work you have to do, slogging through Planet List to find this stuff. It's just unbelievable. And anyway, the link to this repository should be on that page. Simple. And this is the sort of URL I imagine. List.org should be the page, list.org/library, list.org/download/white paper, whatever. There is a problem, which is that list.org is taken. It belongs, thank you, the domain belongs to the Association of Lisp Users, and it mirrors their front page, which does lists and conferences, but none of those other items. Ends knows, yes. Okay, we've been discussing this one for about a decade. I think it's time something changed somewhere along the line. Generously linked. What I mean is that whenever each implementation does links to each of the following, and I do hope that every implementation does this, there should be a link to the repository. So each implementation has got, please, to a link to either the hyperspec or something equivalent, and to Slime or to something equivalent if it's got better, and to QuickLisp, and so on and so forth. Reverse links from QuickLisp. What I mean is that if the QuickLisp listing had some form of links back into the repository when the repository exists, so you can click on something to find out what it does, that would make QuickLisp even more wonderful than it already is. So for each library, there should be a one-line description, and then all this other stuff, I guess, on a page of its own. So you can go to that page and find out what CLFrog does, what you need to get hold of it, and so on and so forth. Brilliant. How hard is that? I think this has to be done by hand, and I don't think the wiki model serves us here, because it's too random. I think in order to get the stuff on this page, you actually need manual intervention, and that's going to involve quite a bit of effort. And this is my conclusion. No one's going to do this for free. We're talking about several months upfront work and then a long-term commitment to maintain it, as new libraries come in and old ones stay. So, what have I done? I have no idea how long I spent doing it. I believe I've identified a need for a quality repository of our libraries, suggested standards for maintaining them. We need to bribe somebody to do this work. And this is an interesting business. There was a great success with crowdfunding earlier this year. I'm not sure it's the appropriate model for this project, but if anybody thinks they can make it run, please do. Maybe the companies that make the most profit out of Lisp would like to plough some back in. It's a good investment. But talking about this, it sort of stirs up some questions as to who we are as a community, other than people who come together at these meetings and have a great time. Anyway, back to the book. If you remember the book, where I started, I think there is some space for something similar to what I was trying to write. I think the project I was writing may have been too ambitious. I think it's a great idea to try and cover somehow all the lists, all the libraries, and so on. Well, not all the libraries, but a range of libraries across these projects. But the bloody things keep moving. And between writing the book and getting it printed is 2 or 3 years. And you look at, say, Conrad's book, and when he said it was coming out, and when it actually came out, and it's no fault of Conrad, this is just how these things go. And in particular, the constraints of being an O'Reilly book and fitting into their pattern of hundreds of existing books actually made it a lot harder than if I'd gone to a publisher who wasn't bothered. Well, I didn't go to a publisher, they came to us. But if it had been with a publisher who wasn't trying to fit it into an established series, that might have made it easier. And then trying to get it printed on squash trees and still making a profit with something as volatile as libraries is very difficult. So anyway, here's the final word, and it explains the title of my talk, which is not from a Monty Python song after all, and I'll take questions. Any questions? Thank you very much. First time I tried to give this talk, it took almost 2 hours. In the last 2 practices, it took 45 minutes, and I seem to have got it down now to 28. So next time I give the talk, it'll be over before it started. Would it have been easier if it had been a narrow book such as Web Technologies? Yes, I think it would have been. And there's something to learn there about when you're taking on any project in this little life, is to keep it simple. We learn that when we're learning to program. But somehow carrying that forward into the rest of our life, it somehow eludes us. But yes, it would have been. And I think Web Technologies would have been a really good one. You could have done clients and servers. And it wouldn't have covered everything, but I could have got onto the desktop and could have covered a lot of Common Lisp. And that is the one that has occurred to me. Quality control for libraries. You will indeed, yeah, okay. Well, one of the strengths of Common Lisp is its multiple approach to everything. So, you know, I say 11 Lisps, you must be joking. And at least 11 XML libraries, heaven's sakes. I've written many. Probably everyone else here has as well. And then they shrugged and went and picked one up off the internet. How do you tell which are the good ones in this page of 40? I imagine that the person who's editing the website collects people's comments, or tries them out and picks one that at least makes sense and seems to cover all the bases and says, these 2 or 3 seem to be good. And then if people disagree, okay, I haven't given this much thought. I don't like the Guido approach. You know what I mean by that? In Python, Guido chooses the one that's going to be, and that's the one it is. I think that's a little bit heavy-handed. Although it does mean that you go to python.org, and there is one solution for every problem that you need. And actually, some of the times over the years in the list applications I've been working on, what we've done is we've just written a quick command line interface to Python and used their answer because it was easy to find it. Okay, I'm with you. Some sort of restricted wiki system with a small number of trusted editors rather than one person being paid to do the work. That might work. I do feel that manual intervention from people who are managing this, I mean, I had thought one person, but the group, the committee, fine, I don't have any problem with that. But I think it does need manual editing. I think you need to pay them the going rate. I'll tell you my rate later if you like. I think it would be full-time for a few months. And I haven't really scoped this out, but you're not going to do this in a week. And you're probably not going to do this in a month. And if it took you as long as a year, I'd say you'd put too much effort into it for initial setup. So I think a few months to set it up. And then some level of part-time activity, a day or so a week, to deal with the emails that come in and somebody says, hey, see, old frog appears to have died, or it doesn't work with CUDA 19, or whatever. Yeah, I have to do the sum, but, anybody else can do it. Arthur. I'm not going to use this platform to tout for work.